Hello friends, welcome back to the class. In our previous lecture, I have talked about process of communication and its elements, and then verbal communication and its types, written communication, oral communication. And in the present lecture, I am going to talk about non-verbal communication and its subtypes and also the 7 C's of effective communication. So, I am Dr. Sonali Maurya, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Chhatrapati Sahooji Maharaj University, Kanpur. And let us start with the class. So, as you can see that here, only 7% of all communication is verbal communication. So, you must be surprised knowing this fact that since we don't generally pay attention to the non-verbal communication. So, over 55% is body language and 38% is paralanguage, and there is just only 7% role of all communication is verbal, right. So, that you can see here in this flow chart, body language is 55%, paralanguage is 38% and verbal is only 7%. So, this particular this presentation covers non-verbal communication, sign language, body language, paralanguage, proxemics, chronemics and haptics, listening as well as silence, and also the 7 C's of effective communication. So, what is non-verbal communication? Non-verbal, you must have heard that communication can be without words also. So, non-verbal media generally operate alongside verbal communication with a certain physicality in their expression. So, for example, this non-verbal communication is not word based, and why and how. So, non-verbal media are not based on complex language systems like verbal communication. There is a universal grammar rule and syntactical structure. So, they have a certain physicality in the expressions, right, as I talked about the sign language, body language, chronemics, haptics, proxemics, and the silence and listening, right. So, it's a so that is why it has the physicality in their expression. And it is also based on cultural context. The cultural environment also plays a very pertinent role in non-verbal communication, because here the meanings of non-verbal messages are often approximations and cannot be fully relied on verbal communication, because here the risks are higher, or the misinterpretations are possible when you are relying completely or entirely on verbal communication. But this non-verbal communication is something which is often spontaneous, for what we don't generally make any effort, right. This is something which is an involuntary process. We are not doing something, we generally, sometimes we also make certain efforts in non-verbal communication as well, but it is generally or often a spontaneous a process, because non-verbal medium is sometimes deliberately used, but it is often a spontaneous phenomenon. And here emotions, because expressions of feelings and emotions is one significant area where the non-verbal medium plays an important role. So, these are the types of non-verbal communication. So, here you can see the taxonomy of non-verbal media. So, non-verbal communication can be divided into sign language, kinesics, which is also known as body language, paralanguage, and then proxemics, that is also known as space language, and then there is a chronemics, जिसको हम बोलते हैं time language, right. Then the sign language is subdivided into audio signs, visual signs, and then audio visual both, right. That is the blend of the both audio and visual. Then of course, because in our previous lectures we have already dealt with this concept of body language, where we talked about the head movement and facial expressions, eye movement, eye contact, gestures, postures, appearance, of course, very important, right. So, and then paralanguage. Paralanguage, I think that people generally don't pay attention to. So, that is, but this Also, this is also very, very important because it plays 38% role in communication process. All right. So here, like your volume, pitch, speed, pauses, and word stress, they are very, very important in non-verbal communication. And what is proxemics? Proxemics, which is also known as a space language, where there's a distance also conveys certain meaning, like your surroundings, your space zones and color codes, of course. So they are the these are the determinants on the basis of which you generally consider the meaning or convey meaning in proxemics. And then chronemics, or which is known as time language as well. So for example, the punctuality or time management and the chronemics. So they also convey certain, punctuality also convey certain meanings. Then so now let's discuss that what is sign language, because sign language are the symbols commonly understood within communicative groups. All right. So and it is divided into, or it is subdivided into audio signs or visual signs, and then the blend of both audio and visual, right? So here the key thing is that the sign language can be audio, visual, or audio visual, and each serving unique communicative needs, right? So for example, first let me talk about the audio signs. What are the audio signs? Audio audio signs or the sound that convey message to our faculty of hearing. So among the most ancient communication practices, for example, the drum beats or the drum beating or the conch blowing and ambulance hooters, fire tenders, sirens, and office buzzers and alarm clocks. So they are the certain examples of the audio signs. They convey certain, for example, ambulance hooter or the drum beats and the alarm clocks. So they convey certain meaning to us, right? And and they are known as audio signs. Then there's a visual sign as well. So graphics and illustrations with associative meanings. For example, the road sign, zebra crossing, the maps, graphs, and traffic lighting or the traffic lights. So there are certain advantages of visual language, because it conveys a very condensed message. So the receiver grasps meaning at a glance without paying much attention to it. For example, when we see the zebra crossing on the road, we generally know that this is the place where we can cross the road. So right, so and these signs they have, or these visual signs, they have the universal appeal, and they are not dependent on on language. Then there's the audio visual, which is the combination, so the blend of both. Hearing and seeing simultaneously. So here that is one of the most popular medium in present day. And here for example, you can take the example of television or films or the multimedia, which are the best example of audio visual. And here the immense richness, and this particular audio visual, it has the immense richness potential as well, because it is very, very persuasive in nature, which is unparalleled, and it is also technologically based and growing stronger day by day. Then there's a kinesics. I think that body language we have already discussed about this in detail in our previous lecture, and the body which constantly sends signals to receivers, even if we don't intend to, right? This is something, as I said, that this is something which is involuntary process, which you can see right now, even looking at me, because here, the body language, it is a passive. That's why it is also said that it is a passive medium, because since you are not doing you are not making any effort, so that's why it is also considered a passive medium. Here, the body doesn't wait for our conscious mind to signal messages, right? When we are speaking, our hands, eye movements, and our facial expressions, our head movement, they are generally acting, and then we are not doing it voluntarily. They are in the process. They are active, or we are doing it effortlessly. So that's why. So head and facial expressions, they are very important, gestures are very important. So and eye contact, postures, and our appearance, like in our personality, of course, that is also the part of the body language, is very, very important. Then like the common gestures and their meanings, that I think that we have already discussed about it, like in detail in our previous lecture, that you can like go back and see. So for example, like here you can see just one gesture, but in moderate form and exaggerated form. For example, like forward leaning. So if it is in the moderate form, then it conveys like the friendliness. But if it is exaggerated, then it like it may convey hostility. Your direct eye contact, if it is moderate, then it conveys like friendliness, or if it is exaggerated, it may convey hostility. Unique appearance, like that is, if it is moderate, that is very, very creative person, and if it is like very exaggerated, then it's like rebellious person. So this is how you can like read these gestures as well, and these gestures are very important, because what gestures could mean in moderate and like or in exaggerated forms, right? And then there are certain like avoidable gestures. And body language in business. For example, if you are like working at a place or in any business organizations, so there are certain like gestures which like one should avoid in order to make like an effective communication, in order to show your personality. So what happens, for example, like the gestures like hair twirling, which generally shows like incompetence or like uncertainty, and then shaking of knees, which shows nervousness or restlessness, and rubbing arm or leg, it demonstrates like the anxiety about the competence. Or hand in front of mouth, it also shows anxiety about the confidence, that you're not very, very confident. And then wringing hands and fingers, it also shows what? Nervousness, insecurity, and of course the slumped posture. It shows boredom or like alienation. So in the process of like negotiation or interviews or team meetings, your body language, at these like there are certain places where one should like very, very careful about your body language as well. For like during the negotiations, like body language generally like reads the mental pulse of co-worker before verbal orders are issued. So the people generally judge you on the basis of your body language, your personality during the interview, during the negotiation, during the team meeting. So the first expressions are formed through the posture and gestures before words are spoken, right? So here, like the team meetings, like when the manager can like sense if the employees are like disturbed or then use the verbal communication to address that, right? So like in certain situations, one should like avoid these gestures in order to make an effective communication. Very, very important. That is something like this something like the paralanguage. Paralanguage, the highlighter of the oral message, and it has like 38%. It makes the 38% of communication, right? So paralanguage is like language, and it is a linguistic property because it doesn't use words as such, and it uses certain physical aspects of language articulation to emphasize the central focus of the message. For example, like volume variation, pitch variation, inflections or non-fluencies, and also the speed of like speaking, pauses, word stress. So all these linguistic properties, they are very, very important in terms of like communication in non-verbal communication. So first of all, let me tell you that here like these features like volume variation or speed of speaking or pitch variation, as well as pauses, non-fluencies, word stress, how they work actually, right? This like the volume variation. What is this volume variation? Volume variation, like it is the indicator of sound energy. Volume variation, it is the indicator of sound energy, and the greater distance or noise, or the greater volume indeed, right? And low volume often characterize upper hierarchy in organization. So right, everything depends on like volume variation. And pitch variation, what is pitch variation? Like shrillness of sound or removes monotony and also makes a speech very, very persuasive in nature, right? Because higher pitched voices often used by those in higher position or so I mean the people who are the subordinate, they can't generally use the higher pitch. And the speed of speaking, of course, it also matters a lot, because the rate at which an utterance is delivered, whether it is too fast, I mean the receiver cannot, when it is too fast, the receiver cannot grasp the meaning or cannot comprehend the intended meaning. Or so it must allow different parts of the message to be understood, right? So there should be variation in in the speed of a speaking as well. And at certain moments there should be pauses, and these pauses should be very, very deliberate in speaking. For example, a well-timed pauses, that wherever it is required there should be pauses, and these pauses should be deliberate, right? So because it may create the well-timed pauses, they may create suspense that something is going to happen, or what happened, the people or the listeners or the target audience, they start pondering over, and also keep the listeners very, very attentive, right? Because when you are not using pauses, then it also becomes your speech becomes monotonous, right? And sometimes the receiver or the audience, they may also lose interest, right? So the oral equivalent of parenthesis or too many pauses cause distraction. So there should be moderate pauses as well. Too many pauses is also bad, and no pauses is also bad. So there should be very, very equivalent, or very it should be something which should be used appropriately. And then of course the word distress, shifting emphasis in a sentence also changes meaning, right? So you can see the example here. Is this how you study? So here is this how you study? The stress is made on you, that here you is important, that that you I mean it was not expected from you that that you are studying, or you are taking it, you are taking the study for granted, right? And is this how you study? Is this how you study? I mean this particular portion was not supposed to be studied like that, right? So here in all these sentences, how the meaning is how the meaning is getting changed just because of the use of a stress in on certain words. So for example, because syllable stress also distinguishes verb from from noun as well. So in the last thing that you can see that non-fluencies non-fluencies, here the terms used in moments of distress. For example, okay, when you don't generally say the entire or the complete sentence, but you say just okay, or so I mean just give breathing space to speaker and reveal the mental state to receiver. That so this non-fluency generally reveals the mental state of the, or the psychological state of the speaker, of the speaker to the receiver. So here you can see that the proxemics, which is also known as a space language, how space and surroundings communicate meaning. So here this particular area that you can see here, that is the intimate space, that is generally 1.5 feet, and here and this space that is generally that is the personal space, which is 1.5 to 4 feet, right? And then there is this space that is the social space, that comes from 4 to 12 feet, and then there is a public space that is 12 feet and beyond, right? So in generally body language is as primary, and also verbal is minimal. So here in all these different spaces, how these different spaces with different proximity, they convey a different meanings. So for as one moves outward, and body language also as one moves outward, the body language role decreases, and here oral and para language role generally increase. Then color codes in communication. color codes and moods, they also convey a certain meanings. For example, the red color, it also conveys moods in different, and it has different meaning in different cultural setup. So red is generally considered as a hot, angry, or contrary, or hostile, passionate, love, excitement. So it has in different in cultural, in different cultural setups, sometimes it is considered happiness or relentless or agitation or race or danger. Blue is the color which also conveys mood. For example, the cool, which is considered cool, pleasant, leisurely, or distant, secure, peace, or calm. But in different, in cultural meaning, if you see that, it also indicates dignity, sadness, truth, or ocean or water. So this is how you can read all these color in different cultural setups. Then comes chronemics and haptics. Chronemics and haptics, this is also known as time language and the language of touch. Chronemics is the language of time, and then haptics is the language of touch. So what is this chronemics? Chronemics, if we define it, here the communication conveyed through a sense of time. What is chronemics? Whatever message or the communication conveyed through a sense of time, and it reflects the sender's background, discipline, seriousness of purpose, and punctuality. And if for example, if the person is very punctual, so it because here your punctuality is making your personality. So your punctuality is also conveying certain message. For example, if we take the example of any organization, so we generally create a perception, or we generally make or create an image of that particular image or institution on the basis of the punctuality, or the seriousness, and how they are very concerned about the time. For example, if the trains or the flights running late, so it generally projects that inefficiency and mismanagement at the level, at the organizational level, because a delay is is a form of miscommunication, right? Or in cultural specific, for example, in Western European or US cultures, place great emphasis on time, because others have a more relaxed approach to time. For example, in India, whenever we schedule any program at a certain time, we generally perceive that it is not going to start at this particular time, we will go half an hour late. But in Western setup, we are generally very we have this clarity, if they are saying that at 10, so they will start sharp at 10, right? So this kind of perception we create, So here the chronemics or the time language also convey certain meanings. And most sensitive, this haptics is very the language of touch is very sensitive topic, because here all non-verbal media, this is something which is very sensitive, because touch brings sender and receiver in direct physical contact, and it also requires maximum sensitivity to culture as well, because here the language of haptics also varies from one culture to another, because cultural variation, because what is acceptable in one culture may be unacceptable in another. So that's why haptic interaction between genders requires particular care when you are using the haptic language. For example, patting on the back, or embracing, kissing, or shaking hands, optimally used. So neither two is stronger nor too weak, because when they are too stronger or too weak, so they also convey certain meaning, right, depending on the cultural setup. And then listening, of course, the complementary role of the receiver in oral communication. As we discussed, when you are not a good listener, you cannot be a good speaker as well, right? So there are certain do's and don'ts of of listening and of listening. So when you are listening something, be quiet and listen properly, be very careful and very attentive in nature. And also motivate the speaker, when not just motivate the speaker using the verbal language, but you can also nodding your head, or establishing the eye contact, you can motivate the speaker, right. And you can, I mean, your concentration, your your eye contact or your body language may also show that you are interested in what the speaker says, or you're very when you are a passive listener and you are not paying attention to, then it shows that you are not interested in the talk, and I mean, it becomes very, very demotivating for the speaker as well. So listen between the lines. I mean, what the speaker is not even saying, you need to infer that meaning also. So that is only possible when you are a good listener, when you are an active listener. And be attentive and patient. Sometimes even the things are I mean, sometimes even the things, they may become boring as well, and they are very, very lengthy as well. But being an attentive leader, being an attentive speaker, you should be very, very careful and should be very, very patient as well sometimes, because I mean, if you are not patient, you are not attentive, then it becomes again demotivating for the speaker. And also observe body language signals of the speaker, right? And that is only possible when you are attentive. And be open-minded and empathize with the speaker, and also use paralanguage cues in order to give the feedback, and also establish eye contact. So these are certain do's that one should follow for becoming a good listener. And what are the don'ts that one should not do? One should be very, very careful. Don't interrupt midway. If you have any query, any question, to the speaker, wait for your turn. Let that person complete the talk, or the whatever the message or whatever he's saying or she's saying, and then you are not supposed to interrupt midway. So being a good listener, one should not do this, and don't get distracted. I mean, when you are listening to someone, don't generally get distracted, and don't pass early judgments as well, and do not, I mean, you're not supposed to make early judgments without listening the entire talk, or the the complete the speech of the speaker. Just be patient, listen carefully, and then make your conclusions or your any judgment. So, and then also don't fake attention. I mean, don't act smart that you are listening, but you are not. So you cannot actually pretend. You should be a good listener, and don't be don't go by appearance. I mean, don't generally judge a person looking at the appearance of, or appearance of that person. We generally, it is said that the first impression comes we generally make looking at the person's personality or the outer appearance, but we should be very, very careful in that case also, and do not go by the paralinguistic skills as well. Judge by the content, because sometimes the reasonal the impact may also be very, very visible and in a speaker's talk or a speaker's speech when the person is conveying the message. So don't just don't judge a person on the basis of paralinguistic cues, right? And don't criticize a speaking cycle as well, because I mean, it varies from one person to another. So only focus on the content, and one should not focus on the rest of the things the appearance and the the appearance and the the regional influences, the person is coming from Orissa, Bihar, or Bengal, or UP, or so one should one should be very, very careful in terms of making any comment on the basis of the reasons. Then the types of listening as well, because the listening process from from the reception to feedback, because listening is very important in terms of giving the feedback, and it has certain certain types also. the first type is evaluative listening. So what is evaluative listening? Evaluative listening is what is what is what is heard is matched with what the receiver already knows. So I mean, being the receiver, you must have certain the knowledge about that particular talk or about that particular the theme, what the speaker is talking about. So that is known as the pre-existing knowledge, right? One should have that pre-existing knowledge. So whatever the speaker is speaking and what you know, what you know earlier. So those, your pre-existing knowledge and what the speaker is saying, it should it should match, right? Because it helps receiver weigh the value of the message before responding. And it also, one should also avoid of avoids of the cuff reactions, because if you do not know, if you do not have any knowledge, any pre-existing knowledge about that talk, what the speaker is speaking, at the time it becomes very, very difficult to evaluate, to evaluate that particular, the concept. And then what is discriminative listening? Discriminative listening focuses on particular oral messages, giving them precedence over others, and it also helps extract meaningful messages from the chaotic or very noisy situation. So being a good listener or active listener, it's our responsibility to extract meaning, what is what you are whatever is important for you, even irrespective of so many noises and distractions. So that is known as discriminative listening. And appreciative listening. And appreciative listening is something here the listener shows interest to keep the sender motivated, using the body language and the para language to indicate continued alternatives and appreciation. Because if you are sitting sitting in front of the speaker and not giving any clues whether that that particular talk is very, very interesting for you or not, right? And then when you are giving the feedback and the proper attention even, right, and then sometimes smiling and nodding, your eye contact, so it actually motivates, these are certain ways of appreciating to the speaker. And then empathetic listening. So here the receiver actually puts himself in the position of the speaker and then trying to understand the message from the speaker's point of view, including emotion and psychological conditions. So being a good listener, when you're putting yourself in the situation of the sender or the speaker, and then understanding the mental or psychological state of that particular person, so that is known as empathetic listening. Then silence also acts as communication, because it is a passive but powerful non-verbal medium of communication, since silence is perhaps one of the most pervasive passive non-verbal medium, yet it can become an effective communicative tool as well, because silence also communicates mental state of the speaker. When a person becomes silent, that itself sends a message about their current mental condition, right? So it's very, very important to even infer meaning, certain meaning from that silence also. Opportunity for reflection, because silence also provides us, the opportunity or the space, to consider for the mental relaxation or the space to gather or organize thoughts, right? So the silence is also very, very important in terms of non-verbal communication. It is also considered as a passive interpretation, because it can be interpreted as sometimes as fear or out of respect or shyness or disgust or sadness, right? So it depends on depends on the situation, on the context, right? And but in silence mode also, because in the very beginning, as I said, that in the non-verbal communication the risks are higher in terms of misunderstanding, in terms of misinterpreting the things, because there when you are entirely dependent on non-verbal cues or non-verbal communication, then the risks are higher, the risk of misunderstandings are higher, because silence is often taken taken for assent. And in meetings or in remaining in meetings, remaining silent may send wrong signals. So appearing you are disinterested or you are ignorant. So there are certain limitations as well, right? And now let me tell or talk about the 7 C's of effective communication. So there is a checklist for making your communication well structured, clear and effective. So what are these 7 C's of effective communication? Your message should be complete, concise, considerate, clear, concrete and courteous and correct, right? Then so let me tell you that what is completeness of message. Complete, I mean one should must convey all facts required by the audience. So being the sender, this is your responsibility that you should include all the required facts, and one should not leave any question unanswered, right? So it actually aids better decision making and also enhances organizational reputation when your message is complete, when you're not leaving any query, any message unanswered for the for your audience. And your message also should be very, very concise. I mean, conciseness should be there. Let's say that what you want to convey in the fewest words. So it also saves time and also cost. So highlighting the main message, highlighting the main points. So one should not be very, very repetitive in nature, and your message should be very, very comprehensive in nature as well. And the third C is consideration. I mean, the step into the shoes of others, right? Empathy. Consider the audience viewpoints, background, mindset, educational level, and the regional background, and then emphasize you approach. I mean, your customer or your client, or you are working so for you. I mean, the other people are important for you, right? So there should be emphasis on you approach, and also show optimism and empathy. Then clarity should be there, emphasize on a specific message or goal at a time. So use exact, appropriate and concrete words, and complete clarity enhances the meaning of the message as well, right? And then concreteness. I mean, your message should be very, very particular, clear, rather than fuzzy and very, very general. It should be very specific, very well focused, and supported with specific facts and figures, not misinterpreted. And it should be strengthens because it also strengthens confidence, right? Then the courtesy, being the sender, one should show the sender's expression while respecting the receiver, because sincerely polite or very, very judicious and also enthusiastic, not biased, and also use terms showing respect. So there should be courtesy in your message as well, and the correctness, no grammatical errors, exact, correct and well timed message. It also boosts confidence and checks precision and accuracy of facts and figures used in your message. So, I mean, for any effective communication, awareness of 7 C's makes you an effective communicator, applicable to both written and oral and written communication. So these are 7 C's, complete, concise, considerate, clear, concrete, courteous and correct. These are certain takeaways from takeaways from this lecture. As I said that only 7% of communication is verbal. 55% is body language, and 38% is paralanguage. So verbal communication includes sign language, kinesics, paralanguage, proxemics, chronemics, haptics, listening, and silence. Whereas body language, as I said, that it is entirely, it is an involuntary and reflects, psychological states important in negotiation, interviews, and team management. Whereas proxemics defines, 4 zones: intimate, personal, social, public, and each enabling different communication styles. So here the 7 C's, like, complete, concise, considerate, and concrete, courteous, and correct, form the foundation of effective communication. Thank you.